Hello everyone.
Hi.
Today we're going to discuss one of the main and interesting books by David Chambao called China Goes Global, The Partial Power. The main idea of which is that China is rising and tries to contribute to the global governance and try to be a global power like the United States or the European Union, for example. However, it does not according to several factors which we're going to discuss later on in this discussion. And would like to introduce you and start the discussion with a small introduction concerning the fact that China was an isolated nation for 1,000 of years until the 20th century.
Since Deng Xiaoping came to power, he introduced Taoguan Yanhui theory, which basically means keeping a low profile and show up when necessary. He also introduced liberalization of prices and starting to open up to the outer world. Nevertheless, after a few decades of People's Republic of China relatively peaceful relations with other countries, everything was crushed on 4th of June 1989.
On 4th of June 1989, the so-called Tiananmen Square protest happened. This is a national movement provoked by the Beijing protest. A lot of students went out on the square claiming for more liberal and democratic reforms. However, it was suppressed by the military and a lot of students died. Thousands of students died. It provoked a negative behavior towards China by the West, especially, and by neighbor countries.
Collapse of the Soviet Union and Soviet republics also played a major role. China was again isolated from the West. This all for introduction. Now we would like to discuss modern Chinese diplomacy. 2011-2012 marks the beginning of the 10th period of People's Republic of China diplomacy to date. During this period, China was attempting to revive relationships with neighboring and some Western countries like the United States.
Ever since Qing Dynasty self-strengthening movement, Qi Tian Yongdong, there has been a tradition that diplomacy should drive an overriding goal of national and economic development. However, right now we can see that China doesn't exercise a global power in many spheres.
In recent years, China's international diplomacy displayed various characteristics that parallel the seven schools of thought, which see the Chinese diplomacy very differently. This makes the Chinese diplomacy more diverse.
Yet the Chinese diplomacy is quite complicated because it shows the different patterns of both aggressive and pacifist politics. It clearly shows that China doesn't know what global identity it should have.
This fact limits modern Chinese politics as there is no consensus between different politicians. They have identity crisis apart from being wealthy.
And what China certainly does is multilateralism and implementing the multilateralist institutions, which means cooperating with other nations to tackle the global issues on international level. For example, contributing to the United Nations peacekeeping operations.
However, China does not contribute according to the size of this nation and to the status of the second world economy. In comparison to European nations, which are relatively small but contribute to the United Nations more.
It happens for two reasons. Firstly, uncomfortable position in a post-World War II liberal world, which seems kind of uncomfortable and inconvenient for the socialist China. The second one is the Chinese view that the global governments and contribution of into global governments is a trap laid by the United States to tie down and limit the Chinese rise in order for it to not become a global power like the United States and become the two biggest rivals.
From this, we may infer that China tries to build its world image and tries to contribute to the world governance. However, it does not show as much effort as other nations.
And now I would like to give a word to our colleagues who would like to talk about the challenges which China poses to the United States and other nations, as well as current Chinese economic, military, and trade conditions.
The ambivalence of Chinese global power involves mandatory consideration of military, cultural, and economic aspects. Talking about the former, military presence is a matter of public debate as the country does participate in multilateral military actions, for example UN peacekeeping operations, protects freedoms and rights, sustainability and stability in the countries of the third world, and actively multiply the quality and the quantity of its own military personnel, technologies and equipment. At the same time, China's global security presence is not involving in the traditional great power manner of establishing alliances, acquiring bases and sending troops abroad, sailing the navy around the world, cursing others, or fighting in actual conflicts. As it can be seen from the previous points, it is rather doubtful to claim that China is a global power regarding its military presence. However, the real tendencies towards the latter are obvious.
Considering the cultural aspect of Chinese global presence, it lacks soft power, which refers, according to Joseph Nye, to an ability to shape one's preferences and get desired outcomes without physical coercion. The reasons for this phenomenon are various. Chinese culture is not universal, democratic development is still limited, and strong Chinese nationalism serves as an obstacle there. A country's political system and diplomacy are important elements of a country's soft power, but China doesn't hold the lead in these dimensions. Other countries don't want to be like China, and China is not a magnet attracting others to it. At present, China doesn't have the universal appeal which is necessary to possess soft power.
The next aspect to talk about is the economy of China in global terms. It is important to keep in mind that the state is the world's second largest economy. Although it is a trading superpower, its exports are still dominated by generally low-end consumer products. Furthermore, despite it has few leading multinational corporations, Chinese brand presence in international markets is rather poor. Considering ODI, overseas direct investments, in short it means all the investments, financial or others, for example technological, that come from the Middle Kingdom to other countries, we can conclude that in spite that for 3 decades China has been one of the world's top recipients of foreign direct investments. After the 2010, the situation reversed.
Talking about Chinese monetary policy, they are eager to make their currency, the yuan, the main reserve currency to ensure its stability. However, Chinese legal system related to monetary regulations is not perfect, what makes the potential buyers of the currency to feel skeptical about it, and they would prefer to avoid taking these risks. In essence, China is a strong economy, although it has a long way to go in order to achieve the status of the world's largest economy and the most influential economic power.
The next idea from David Shambaug's book we would like to discuss is the challenges that China poses to other countries. Here we can claim that these challenges can be the result of both outcomes of Chinese race to convert into the global power.
Firstly, if China is to become a global power, other nations will definitely be influenced by the change in the global balance of power. China's rise in world affairs has been disconcerting for many countries, as China is often seen as non-transparent, propagandistic and dismissive of foreign concerns. China is also seen by many as not comfortably fitting into the existing international liberal world order and having a hidden revisionist agenda to overturn that order. Thus, we can conclude here that China serving as a global power might pose a threat to other countries in economic terms, for example, in job losses, as Chinese enterprises abroad are more interested in hiring Chinese workers in order to eliminate unemployment at home, or in political terms, due to the fact that, as discussed before, China lacks comprehensive power, and thus it might encroach on sovereign principles of other nations while wanting to achieve its own will.
Secondly, if it appears that the Middle Kingdom continue to be regional power, the global contribution of the country is more likely to decline. China may not be obliged to meet some restrictions, for example, to reduce the level of CO2 emissions, or the country will not arrange or enter the world alliances with other countries, what will eventually damage the system of global multilateralism. Furthermore, the problems which assume cooperative decision-making between countries, such as UN peacekeeping operations, the lack of Chinese real support, what is also known as free ride problem, that what will make these challenges even more difficult to solve.
Considering the previous points, it's very difficult to decide what will be more beneficial for other countries. Either China will remain a global actor that lacks true global power, or if it becomes a real global power.
And now we would like to give a word to our colleague who will talk about challenges and Chinese behavior in the future.
In conclusion, we'd like to say that although China is a great power, it is sometimes overestimated and it is still not an equal rival to such a superpower as the United States. It is true that China is the world's second military force and it is an economic superpower, yet it has to work on its global image because the image of China in international society is not very positive. Actually, there are only few countries which would like to be like China. Moreover, China is seen rather isolated and culturally inferior. Nevertheless, I guess that because of its people mentality, China possesses lots of potential to succeed in that goal, but the sheer geographical and cultural remoteness still causes insufficient global understanding of functioning of country in general. Although China international image has negative connotations, it is still a rising superpower which has a lot to display and to prove in the international community. So Shen Bao's book is very useful for people who are curious about China, a country with lots of contradictions which treats its path to become a major power.